Baruch atah Adonai, Eloheinu melech haolam, asher kidshanu b'mitzvotav v'tzivanu la'asot b'divrei Torah. All right, this is the second session in our two-part series on government and the justice system in the Jewish tradition. Last time, for those of you who are here, you remember we discussed, we looked at the death penalty in Jewish law. And today we're going to look at issues relating to war in Jewish law. So we're going to look at a lot of halachic material, which is Jewish legal texts. These texts, all of them that we're going to look at are old texts. So, we just always have to keep that in mind as we're reading them, that they're texts from the Middle Ages and a little bit beyond, but they form the basis for our tradition's understanding about questions of war. Now, as we read these texts, we're going to try to explore some kind of meta questions. If you were here last time, remember that I talked to you about we raised the question of applicability. How do these texts relate to the modern circumstance? It's a complex question. It's not so easy. It's not. What we learned last time is that there's definitely not a one-to-one kind of correspondence, such that we can say that what's described in these halachic texts can be applied to our modern circumstance as Jews. In fact, what we're going to see is that because it doesn't work that way, that in and of itself tells us something. Okay, so we're going to explore that. How do we relate to this as modern in a modern American context? Insofar as what our tradition is teaching us about war. As we read the text, we also want to be able to kind of extrapolate principles, values, concepts that we can use to inform the way we think about war as Jews living in 21st century America, even if the paradigms described here in these texts don't apply to our circumstance. Okay? So these are some of the questions that we're looking at. I have two handouts here. Okay, so I only have 25. I don't know how many we have in this room, but I only made 25 copies, so we might need to just share. Yeah, maybe if you don't mind, Phil. 40. Okay. All right, so what we have here is, they're two separate. So this one is one handout, and this one is another. Okay, thanks, Phil. I appreciate it. Okay. Phyllis is making some more, but in the meantime, it is share every other, and then we'll give you more when she gets back. Okay, so you're going to take one of each. There's a yellow one and a blue one. Oh, and you know what? I need to have one. To teach from. Let's see. Can I have one of those yellow ones? Okay, thank you. But you guys, got to have them. Well, Phyllis will be back. Okay. Now, we're going to start reading these texts, and also, these are not the texts that you would have learned in Sunday school. Let's just put it that way. These texts are kind of grisly, but they teach us a lot. They really do, and it's important to be aware. We do say all the time that Judaism speaks to every aspect of life. It really does. I mean, there's not a single inch or nook or cranny of human life that the Jewish tradition does not speak to. Now that said, it doesn't. It's not always flowers and candy. how it addresses these things. War, of course, is a very grisly, difficult kind of area, and these texts relating to it are the same. Okay, so we're going to start by looking at the yellow handout, which is, these are excerpts from Maimonides' volumes, the Mishnah Torah. The Mishnah Torah is Maimonides' code of Jewish law. It's a very long, comprehensive work dealing with, he systematizes kind of all of the laws of the Torah and the Talmud, everything up to his time period. He systematizes them for us to be able to read and access them in an easy way. Maimonides wrote this in the 12th century, when he lived. We're looking at his section of the Mishnah Torah, which I start on the front. Hilchot Melachim u'Milchamotehem, which means the laws of kings and their wars. Okay? So we're going to turn into the first page from chapter 5 of this volume. Maimonides is going to tell us that there are two broad categories of war, as the Torah understands it. Okay, so we're gonna learn about these two categories, map them out generally, and then we'll get into some of the details. Okay, so number one. Let's see, Sandy, will you read chapter 5, paragraph 1?
The king should not wage any other wars before a milchamet mitzvah. What is considered a milchamet mitzvah, the war against the 7 nations who occupied Eretz Israel, the war against Amalek, and a war fought to assist Israel from an enemy which attacked them. Afterwards, he may wage a milchamat reshut, a war fought with other nations in order to expand the borders of Israel or magnify its greatness and reputation.
Okay, so two broad categories of war here. Milchemet mitzvah, which you can try to translate that. He doesn't translate it here for us, but milchama is war. What is mitzvah?
Commandment.
Commandment. Okay, so milchemet mitzvah is a commanded war. Milchemet ha-reshut. Reshut means permission or authorization. Essentially, it's a discretionary war. Okay, so these are the two categories which the Torah speaks about, as elaborated by the Halakha, pertaining to the halakhic Jewish state. This is all referring, remember, to the halakhic Jewish state, which has the various institutions we discussed last time. Who remembers, what are the institutions of this state? The king. Okay, good. The king, the Sanhedrin, the great Sanhedrin, and the priesthood, right? Okay, so these are the three institutions of the state to which Maimonides is referring. Okay, referring very narrowly at this point. Okay, and we have the two categories, Milchemet mitzvah and Milchemet ha-reshut. We'll just go like that. Okay? Commanded war and discretionary. All right. Now he tells us already that he tells us the three kinds of commanded war. Right? The three kinds of commanded war are the war against the 7 nations that occupy the land of Israel. This is, if you're familiar with the narrative of the Torah, when Israel, comes to the land to enter into it after the whole journey through the wilderness, and then at the end of the Torah, into the book of Joshua, which talks about the conquest of the land. The land of Israel was not empty. There were people living there. Okay, and the Torah refers to them as the 7 nations, the 7 Canaanite nations. The Torah commands the Jewish people to vanquish these people, right, and to destroy them and to take the land. Now, whatever you think about that, it's what it says. Okay, it's not the nicest and most pleasant thing in the Torah, but it's there. Okay, so this is a commandment from God to destroy the 7 nations. The second one is the commandment to destroy Amalek. Who's Amalek? Or what is Amalek?
Because he was ego trying to destroy the world.
Okay, Amalek is a nation of people who ambush the Israelites as they travel through the wilderness. Okay, ambush them from behind, and Amalek comes to kind of embody their evil incarnate in the Torah and the biblical tradition. Okay, Haman is a descendant of Amalek. So it is a mitzvah. Also, we read about it in Exodus and Deuteronomy. It's a mitzvah to destroy Amalek, wipe out the memory of Amalek from the world. Okay, so we're commanded then to fight wars against Amalek. So those are 2. The third one, he says here, is war to, how did he put it? Fought to assist Israel from an enemy which attacks them. Okay, so how would you describe it? What does he mean? Dan?
No, I'm just going to get an extra.
Okay.
My hand wasn't up.
Okay. Okay. War is to assist Israel from an enemy
Does that mean
which attacks them.
you're referring to other nations who come to
Yeah.
assist
And well, no. Who come to attack?
Israel? Attack.
Okay,
Yeah.
so if Israel is attacked, now remember, this is not speaking about the state of Israel. This is the people. Okay, if the people of Israel are attacked, then, according to Maimonides, the Torah, it is a commandment of the Torah to fight war in defense. Right? So the third category of milchemet mitzvah is defensive war. Now, Maimonides doesn't tell us here what exactly that means. We're going to go back to this and try and look more deeply at the concept of defensive war. But for the moment, we have these categories. We have the 7 nations, we have Amalek, and we have defensive war. Okay? Are wars that are commanded for Israel to wage by God. Okay? Now, the second broad category of war is milchemet hareshut, discretionary. All right? Now, just by virtue of its name, what do you think marks the difference, or a difference, or some differences, between milchemet mitzvah, commanded war, and milchemet hareshut, discretionary?
Discretionary war means that one wants to gain more territory or overcome another nation.
Okay, well, that's how he defines it.
Yeah.
Right, either to get more, to expand the borders of Israel, or to magnify its greatness and reputation.
But you don't have to do it. It's something.
Right, that's the difference. Okay, remember, milchemet mitzvah is commanded by God, so to do it is to fulfill a mitzvah, whereas milchemet hareshut is discretionary. There's no mitzvah involved. This is something that is a war of choice, as it were, or at least initiative by the king. Okay? So in terms of the origins of these two, the origins of the 2 types of war are very, very important for helping us understand them and why they are what they are. Okay? Who's the initiator of milchemet mitzvah? God. Right? Because God tells you to do it. Who's the initiator of milchemet hareshut? The king, right? The king, or humans. Okay? And this comes to make all the difference in the world. Because it's one thing if you're acting on commandment from God, it's quite another if we're acting on our own initiative, right? Okay, so he says one is either to expand territory, and the other one is to magnify the king's greatness. What does that mean? Well, kind of. I mean, yeah, I guess it could be. Because here he says get more territory. That's one kind of war. And And then magnifying the king's greatness, well, it could be just getting more stuff. Aggrandizing the kingdom. What's that?
Taxes.
Yeah, okay, having access to more wealth. But what about war magnifies the king's greatness? I mean, having more wealth, having more stuff, how does that magnify the king's greatness? What does that mean? Power, okay, reputation, yeah, projecting power, right? Now, why would a kingdom do that, want to do that? Ego, what else?
Security.
How does it impact security?
Getting more strategic land.
Yeah, okay, and that would go to kind of the territorial aspect. But here, just this I understand is kind of flexing muscle, right? Which is to say that when a kingdom wages war, a country wages war, and is victorious and gets lots of stuff, and then they look strong in the world, and that projects strength to other potential adversaries, right? So one possible reason for both of these kinds of war, really, would be kind of in the broad sense, deterrence, right? Because by flexing my muscles and looking strong, I may scare away others who would attack me, right? So in that sense, there may, okay? Yeah, it's flexing muscle, and it's making the world kind of think, well, to attack Russia now, it involves different calculations than it did 6 months ago, right? In part because of the actions of Putin in terms of aggressive war, right? So, in some sense, these may bear some relationship, right? Insofar as they relate to repelling enemies. Now, and remember, Maimonides has not yet kind of elaborated what this category means. Okay, we're gonna have to explore it, but on its face, these two are not totally dissimilar. Okay, so that will play into how we understand, the various halachot laws which are involved in waging these types of wars. Yeah.
So, would a preemptive war be a defensive war?
Well, that's a great question. Okay, so that's something that we're going to have to delve into more deeply. Maimonides doesn't tell us, but I mean, this might seem to be preemptive, or even we have to talk about the difference in terms, and the halakha doesn't know these terms, but preemptive and preventive. You hear this in modern parlance in respect to war. Preemptive war, preventive war. Are they the same? Are they different? I don't know. We have to talk about that. These are categories. These are modern categories which the halakha doesn't know, but the concepts may still be reflected there. In this case, this is a king, going out to wage war to magnify his greatness. Maybe it is because of deterrence. Well, if I launch an attack on Crimea or something, then that's going. And surely, Putin is thinking about these things. If I, invade Crimea and Ukraine, then my adversaries, in Europe and the United States, that's going to change their calculations in respect to their relations with me, right? And maybe it's preventive in the sense that in order to avoid war with so-and-so, I invade Ukraine, because then they're going to be less likely to attack me, right? That's possible. Okay, so in that sense, this could be construed as preventive or deterrent. This is defensive. Maimonides says it's an enemy that attacks as well, but we have to unpack that category. Okay, so this is where we are for the moment. let's continue.
Rabbi, may I ask
Yeah.
a question? In current Israel,
Yeah.
which one would you say is in play?
Well, the question about, the question really is, do these categories apply to current Israel?
Because there are
We need
those
to,
who
we
say
have
the
to
first
explore that as we
category
read
is-
the other texts,
Yeah.
whether these relate. They may or may not, okay? So let's look at number 2. Okay? Sandy, you want to keep going? There is no
There
need.
is no need to seek the permission of the court to wage a milchama mitzvah. Rather, the king may go out on his own volition and force the nation to go out with him. In contrast, he may not lead the nation out to wage a milchama unless the court of 71 judges approve.
Okay, so this now relates to the institutions of government within this system. Okay? So we have 2 actors now that Maimonides has addressed. The king and the Sanhedrin. That's the court. Okay? And they're different for the 2 categories. For Milchemet Mitzvah, the king acts, he just does it. Right? Whereas for Milchemet Hareshut, he can't act on his own initiative. It requires the approval of the Sanhedrin. Now, why? Why these distinctions for the 2 categories, do you think? Erwin?
I was just thinking of, to be able to wage war without going to the Sanhedrin, he's got to make the case that it is from God rather than from him.
Okay.
To make the decision to go to war.
Yeah, that's right. I mean, the decision for war, as it were, has already been made. It's been made by God, right? The king acts as God's agent in this sense, right? I'm carrying out a mitzvah of God by waging this war. Milchemet Hareshut is different because that's discretionary war, and we said that the originator of that action is the king himself, the human being. And in that case, it requires the Sanhedrin because this does not involve something coming directly from God, so there's more safeguards, I guess, as it were. Now, turn for the moment to your blue handout, and we're going to look at text number 1 because the first text is, one second, Joe. The first text is from Nachmanides. Nachmanides is also known as Ramban. He lived about a century or so after Maimonides. And Nachmanides was also a very prolific writer. One of the things that he wrote was a commentary to Maimonides' Sefer HaMitzvot. Sefer HaMitzvot is the Book of Commandments, where Maimonides enumerates all the 613 commandments and describes them. Nachmanides went in and kind of commented on that, and he pointed out certain things that he thought that Maimonides had wrong or forgot or what have you. Okay, so it's called his additions to Sefer HaMitzvot. And here, in speaking about war, the discretionary war, Nachmanides wrote, "It appears to me that the commandment regarding the king or the judge or whoever has authority over the people to take the army out to fight a war of permission," that's discretionary war, or a commanded war, he should consult the Urim and Tumim, and he should act according to their recommendations in the matter. But what are the Urim and Tumim? We talked about this briefly last time. Anybody remember what they are? They're oracles on the breastplate of the high priest. They're like crystal balls, okay? Such that the high priest, through the Urim and Tumim, were able to communicate directly with God and divine God's will, okay? So through the Urim and Tumim, the priests on the question of war, when Ramban says they had to consult the Urim and Tumim, that means when the king decides, hey, I want to go invade China, he can't just do it. He has to go to the court, but also he has to go to the priest, okay? And he has to say, priest, tell me, look into the Urim and Tumim. Communicate with God. Tell me, does God grant permission for this? Okay, and the Urim and Tumim would reveal the answer. As Nachmanides continues, only if they say so should he go up to war, as it is written. He shall present himself to Eleazar the priest, who shall on his behalf seek the decision of the Urim before the Lord. By such instruction they shall go out, and by such instruction they shall come in, he and all the Israelites, the whole community. Okay, so although Maimonides doesn't include it here, in other writings he does include this. So this requirement of the Urim and Tumim is important, and it's really the linchpin of the whole thing, because by adding the Urim and Tumim here through the priesthood, it places these two on the same level. How so? Milchemet mitzvah, milchemet hareshut.
When you're discussing
Both from God.
Right, but okay. In other words, neither war of any kind can be waged only with the explicit authorization of God. Does that make sense? Here, the authorization is already contained in the Torah. Here, the authorization is not contained in the Torah, but it's given through the Urim and Tumim. Right? So what we learn from these texts is that in this paradigm of the halachic Jewish state, in the past and also looking toward the future, because remember how we talked about this is the paradigm also for the Messianic period, war is only waged and can only be waged with the express authorization of God. Okay? So why? Let's explore the ideas underlying this. Why is the tradition telling us this?
You know human nature.
What do you mean?
You know that a king is just a human being and may go out on his own and do what humans do, get stuff.
Okay. All right. Good. Yep.
a king being human has limited power, where God's power is great and all-encompassing.
Yeah.
So to draw upon God, it's like it's approving everything that the king does, if the Urim and Tumim are consulted and approved. So
Yeah. It certainly makes the king and his armies acting as agents of God, right? Not as their own agents. Okay. Good, Joe.
And there's the other factor too, that, who said, the king says that he's got God's power, God speaks through him, but maybe God really doesn't. It's a king that's not
Okay.
on the up and up.
Yeah, so if the king goes astray, says, I want to invade Ukraine, and, God, he's got to get the permission of God, and God says no. It's checks and balances, but it's the ultimate check and balance, right? I mean, this is saying that you as king cannot do anything in this realm, specifically in respect to war, without the permission of God. I mean, this is, the tradition is telling us something very important about the waging of war. I mean, think about other things other mitzvot, other things that we do as Jews. What else do you know of that requires the specific authorization of God for us to do? I mean, the Torah gives us mitzvot, so those things have the authorization of God. And then acting in other realms of life, there's really not much. I don't know. I mean, there may be other things, but there are commandments in the Torah, for sure. So those kinds of actions have specific, their origin is God. But, to do within the framework of the mitzvot and everything that we do, there's very little that I can think of that before we act, the tradition says you have to get God's permission for it, right? In fact, there's an important principle articulated in the Talmud that says, it's a story. Maybe you've heard the story, but it's worth retelling here again. So the story is in the Talmud that the sages were having an argument over a particular matter of Jewish law. And all of them except for one took position X, and then there's this one guy, I think it's Rabbi Eliezer, who takes position Y. And Rabbi Eliezer is convinced that he's right, even though his colleagues all say he's wrong. And he says, I know I'm right. If I'm right, let the tree over there stand up and walk 400 feet. And the tree stands up and walks 400 feet. And his colleagues say, sorry, you're still wrong. And he says, I know I'm right. If I'm right, let the river change the direction of its flow. And the river changes the directions of its flow. And his colleagues say, you're still wrong. And he goes, again, I know I'm right. If I'm right, let the voice from heaven come and proclaim that I am right. And a voice from heaven proclaims and says, Rabbi Eliezer is right. What is your problem? And Rabbi Joshua, who's in the majority, stands up to the voice in heaven and says, ever since you gave us the Torah, you said the Torah is no longer in heaven. The heavenly voice has nothing to say here. Okay, and then God responds to Rabbi Joshua. It says, God chuckles and says, my children have defeated me. Okay, it's a very important story, a great story. The idea being that it's kind of the rabbinic declaration of independence from reliance on heaven. And it's important because in the rabbinic period, there is no more Urim and Tumim. You can't communicate directly with God. But the rabbis say that God gave us the Torah and left it in the hands of human beings to interpret and apply. And whatever the majority of the sages decide, that's the right answer. Even if God himself would have it differently, that's the system that God set up, right? So you have that principle. It is not in heaven. It's in our hands to decide, and yet, these are rabbis. Maimonides is a rabbi. He's part of the rabbinic tradition. Nachmanides, part of the rabbinic tradition. And they're saying that on the matter of waging war, that principle, it is not in heaven, does not apply. Instead, for the act of waging war, you do require a heavenly voice. And without it, sorry, no war. Right? Okay, Sharon.
Okay. As in many of the things that we've been studying, it seems that there are places where God steps in and said, I have to curb the human nature. There's such a thrust towards aggression. This is something we need to deal with. You know what the penalties of each individual punishment, when somebody steals, when somebody covets, all these are written out. But the fact of an action that will hurt innocence, which is part of who we are. This is part of mankind's way of getting along with each other or not getting along with each other. There has to be even a higher checks and balances. I have to step in again.
Yeah, that's right. I mean, it's this. This tells us about the seriousness of war and its kind of utter difference from really anything else. I mean, even when we studied the death penalty last time, we didn't have this requirement of consultation of God before applying the death penalty, right? The rabbinic law provides for significant safeguards, at very high thresholds that have to be met in order for the death penalty to be applied. But nevertheless, it can, if all of those criteria are met, the death penalty can be carried out by human actors, but not with war. Okay, not with war. It's what the halakhic texts are telling us is that this is something totally different that requires the express authorization of God, either as a commandment through the Torah or through the Urim and Tumim. Now, so Nachmanides says in the text number 1 that we read that the Urim and Tumim are required for both kinds of war, Milchemet Mitzvah and Milchemet HaReshut. That is a minority view within the opinion, or within the tradition. The majority opinion is that the Urim and Tumim are required for Milchemet HaReshut, but not for Milchemet Mitzvah, because the authorization provided in the Torah is enough. It's God's express will. Okay? Which means that for these three kinds of war, the king, as Maimonides says, acts on his own. He carries them out. So let's talk briefly about these. The War of the Seven Nations, okay, and the War of Amalek. Now, the Torah tells us wipe out all of these people, but the later texts go in and say that after the conquest of the land, and because of how history has transpired and peoples have, moved here and there and intermingled with other people and so on and so forth, that in our time, back to Maimonides and even now, it is not possible for us to know who the members of the seven nations are and who the descendants of Amalek are. They're kind of scattered among the people, and you can't tell. And because you can't tell, these two mitzvot, they remain on the books, but they are inoperative in our time. You cannot carry them out. Okay? A good example, again, of how the rabbinic tradition kind of ameliorates some of the really difficult and awful stuff in the Torah. So you can't do these things, which leaves only one kind of Milchemet Mitzvah that does remain operative, and that's defensive war. Okay? So, technically, now, and that's also assuming this, Barry. Okay? But, now we have Milchemet HaReshut, discretionary war, which theoretically could be done, and defensive war, which theoretically could be done. Now, we have to turn to understanding the functions of these three institutions, because all of this depends on the institutions, these three, and we're going to see that, and in Maimonides' text we'll read. The king, what is the king's function, you think, in this system of government? What's that? Well, he collects tax, yeah.
He's the
Right.
leader.
What's that?
He's the leader, he makes the ultimate decision.
Okay, so he's the chief executive.
Organizing the army.
Supreme, right, he organizes the army. I mean, right, the king has the supreme executive authority.
He's the figurehead, too. He's the person that they all look up to.
Yeah, he's the sovereign. He's the embodiment of the government. Okay. He controls the treasury, he controls the army, he's the executive, right? In fact, the texts say that only a king in this system can raise an army and call people to serve in war. Without a king, you can't even have an army, okay? So that's the function of the king. What about the Sanhedrin? This is the court of sages, 71. What is their function here, as you could tell so far?
To veto a bad order or what?
Well, maybe in the case of this, Milchemet HaReshut, if the king wants to invade, some such and such country and goes to the Sanhedrin, he has to get their authorization. So they could
Checks and balances.
they could act as a check on the king's executive actions. They're sages. Remember, their job is to interpret the Torah and apply it, right? So it's like a court. It's like a Supreme Court in that sense. Okay, that's not to say that it's the same thing as the U.S. Supreme Court. but to use terminology that we're familiar with, that's kind of their function. They're a supreme court. And then the priesthood, what's the priesthood's function? Here.
Make sure it's from God.
Yeah.
Make sure that everything is.
The priesthood,
Sacrifices.
they do sacrifices, they administer the whole religious life of the community.
Just the
The,
They do the physical
That's all
stuff.
they do.
the temple cult. Okay, the priesthood serves here. They're indispensable to all of this because they have the Urim and Tumim, and through that and more broadly as well, the priesthood is the nexus that connects the people with God. They're the intermediary, right? This highlights a big fundamental difference between not only the system of government, but the whole biblical religious system on the one hand, and our own religious system on the other. In our time, there is no priesthood, right? There's no Urim and Tumim, there's no temple, none of that. If the temple and the priesthood as its agents serve as kind of, if this is kind of the earthly realm and this is the heavenly realm, okay? And the Beit HaMikdash, the temple and the priesthood and everything, is the nexus here. Then without this, there is an unbridgeable chasm here between the earthly realm and the heavenly. That's the world that we live in. When Judaism, in its kind of most classical sense, speaks about the world being broken, this is what it refers to. That the link between the heavens and the earth has been torn asunder, is no longer here. And tikkun olam, right, repairing the world in the classical sense, refers to reestablishing that nexus. Okay? And it's reestablished through the performance of the mitzvot and the coming of the Messiah and all of that. Right? But the rabbis, through all of this, are telling us something very important about our own world. They're telling us that because we no longer have this direct connection with the heavens and with God, there are limitations as to what we can know, what we can do, the power of our human actions to affect redemption, and so on and so forth. Right? I mean, our human governments and political actors operate within a context, in this context only. It's not like it used to be with the king. Okay? That's a whole different way of doing things. It requires a whole different way of thinking and seeing ourselves and our institutions. Does that make sense? All right, what are your thoughts about that? As all of this as an expression of kind of political philosophy. Yeah.
Theoretically, the Torah functions where the priests used to.
But it doesn't. No, it's different. And that's important. The Torah is the intermediary between God and the people, for sure. So here you have the people down here, and here you have God. In our system, in our epic of existence, the Torah is the intermediary. But the Torah, it's kind of one-way communication to a certain degree, right? Well, that's oversimplifying it, but the Torah is kind of what it is. The God, you can't ask questions of the Torah in quite the same way that the priest could ask questions of the Urim and Tumim. I mean, you kind of have what you have, and we can elaborate it and expound it, which is what the rabbis do through all of their halakhic interpretation. But still, there are bounds. I mean, you can't just call up God and say, I got this question, tell me the answer, right? The rabbis affirm here that as great as our interpretive skills are, and you know, to be able to read between the lines and unpack the meaning of the Torah, we always do so with the recognition that we can't know it all. And that's a profound statement of humility on the part of the religious leaders of our period, of the rabbis. Right? They don't claim to be able to access divine wisdom fully. And because of that, they say, that means there are limitations on what we can do and what we can require, you know, of people. Okay, so that's a big statement of theology and also political philosophy, I think, in Judaism. So as people living in modern 21st century America, Jews who take our tradition seriously and look to these texts to say, well, what does Judaism say about war? It says a lot of stuff, and we're going to read some more, but it also says that, but you have to be careful about how you apply it. Because we don't live with this system. We don't have access to God. So there are limitations in how we can apply it, right?
And the Sanhedrin was in place when there was a king and there was a priesthood, and there was still a Sanhedrin.
Yeah.
I can only imagine if there were not, and the priesthood, the temple was destroyed, and there was a Sanhedrin, and God knows what happened to the king.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, the Sanhedrin actually is the glue that brought everything back together, or else we would still be in diaspora, I mean, really diaspora.
Yeah.
And the function of the Sanhedrin, therefore, increased, I think, and the power of the king lessened, and the Sanhedrin
That's right.
became the be-all and the end-all, and their people. I mean,
Yeah, well, that's right. So on one hand, and Nachmanides writes about this in the same passage, which I just didn't do the whole thing, but he says that, you know, after the end of the monarchy, the powers of the king, insofar as they could be exercised outside of sovereignty, but the executive powers of the king devolve upon the Sanhedrin. Okay, so the Sanhedrin kind of absorbs that authority, but the Sanhedrin does not absorb the authority of the priesthood, at least insofar as the Urim and Tumim. Its authority now is human authority, but that human authority doesn't pretend to be the authority that was embodied in the priesthood, because that key dimension is missing. Right? All right, let's go back, because now I want to go back into Maimonides. And so we're going to skip some parts where he says it's a positive commandment to destroy the 7 nations and Amalek, and he's just telling you where we find that in the Torah. I want you to skip forward now to where it says chapter 6. Okay, now in chapter 6 he gets into the particulars. Now that we understand the categories of war, he gets into the particulars about how do you go about carrying it out. And what we're going to see here is that in the Jewish tradition, in the halachic tradition, every aspect of the execution of war is governed by law. It's not the idea of go out and just wage war and kind of good luck, do it your own way. There are very strict parameters by which war must be conducted. Okay? So we're going to look at those. Now the first statement he makes here is one you may have seen before, because it's a favorite to be quoted in the modern context. War, neither a milchemet hareshut or a milchemet mitzvah, should not be waged against anyone until they are offered the opportunity of peace, as Deuteronomy states. When you approach a city to wage war against it, you should propose a peaceful settlement. Now that's so nice, right? That is, that's the kind of thing where, we love to quote that. And our text, I mean, in the modern day, coming out of the Reform movement, when America goes to war, it says, the Torah says you always have to try to get peace before you wage war. It's a great principle. something that we can learn from. However, Maimonides isn't done. All right? And the part that he's not done with is the part that we don't often hear quoted or ever, and it changes the whole equation. All right? So he says, if the enemy accepts the offer of peace and commits itself to the fulfillment of the 7 mitzvot that were commanded to Noah's descendants, none of them should be killed. Rather, they should be subjugated. As the Torah states, they shall be your subjects and serve you. If they agree to tribute, but do not accept subjugation, or if they accept subjugation, but do not agree to tribute, their offer should not be heeded. They must accept both. The subjugation they must accept consists of being on a lower level, scorned and humble. They must never raise their heads against Israel, but must remain subjugated under their rule. They may never be appointed over a Jew in any matter whatsoever. The tribute they must accept consists of being prepared to support the king's service with their money and with their persons. For example, the building of walls, strengthening the fortresses, building the king's palace, and the like, as the Bible relates. This is the tribute which Solomon raised to build the house of God, his own palace, the Milo, the wall of Jerusalem, and all the store cities which Solomon had. All the people that remained from the Amorites, upon them did Solomon lay a tribute of bond service until this day. Okay, then number 2. In the settlement he offers, the king may propose that he is entitled to take half their financial resources, or he may propose to take all their landed property and leave them their movable property, or to take all their movable property and leave their land. All right, so keep going. Number 4. Okay, then we're going to talk about it. Number 4. If they do not agree to a peaceful settlement, or if they agree to a peaceful settlement but refuse to accept the 7 mitzvot, war should be waged against them. All males past majority should be killed. Their money and their children should be taken as spoil, but neither women nor children should be killed, as the Torah states. The above applies to a milchemet hareshut, fought with other nations. However, if either the 7 nations or Amalek refuse to accept a peaceful settlement, not one soul of them may be left alive, as the Torah states. Kill them all. How do we know that these commands are only okay, then we don't need to go there. All right, so tell me what... Okay, well, what does a peaceful settlement mean? It's, it's complete and total conquest, right? And so Maimonides tells us, now this is all, in addition just to being, really belligerent and everything, this is all very important in understanding the philosophy of war. Okay, so what he's telling us is that peace requires 3 things. Okay, that's subjugation, right? They have to be, servants to the Jews. Tribute, right? They have to become kind of vassals, pay money, and so on and so forth. And the 7 mitzvot of Noah. What are the 7 mitzvot, without enumerating them? What are they?
They apply to everyone, not just Jews.
Okay, so the 7 mitzvot of Noah, this is found in Genesis, in the Noah story after the flood. After the flood, God makes a new covenant with humanity. He says, I'm never going to bring a flood again and destroy the earth, but you guys have to agree to live by certain laws. Okay, and the Torah says it, and the Talmud expounds upon it and identifies 7 laws that all of humanity become obligated to as a result of this covenant with God after the flood. Okay? And what Maimonides is telling, and then according to Jewish law, the Jewish people are obligated to live by the 613 commandments. Everybody else of humanity is required to live by the 7 commandments. Okay? So when Maimonides says that the conquered people have to accept the 7 laws of Noah, he's saying that the that he's saying that they have to agree to kind of come under the umbrella of the Jewish way. They don't have to convert and be Jews, but they have to uphold the obligations that our tradition ascribes to them as non-Jews. Right? So it's complete and total vanquishing and subjugation on all fronts in terms of their persons, their resources, and their religious outlook. That's peace, according to Maimonides. That's the peace that has to be offered. It's very different from what we read when we say, before we go to war with Iraq, we have to try to make peace with Saddam Hussein. Okay, right? Very different kind of thing. Now, in saying all of this, what do you think is behind all of this? Are these requirements that Maimonides elaborates here telling us about the nature of war in our tradition?
Purpose, I think, is to save innocent lives of the people who you were going to go to war with.
Okay.
And to also not ravage the land to preserve the ability to grow crops.
Well, okay, we haven't read those texts yet. I mean, he does talk about those things, but just focusing on this for the moment. Yeah,
Well,
Sharon?
there's a holy message in this.
Okay.
There's definitely a holy message that God wants us to make everybody like us.
Well, not exactly, because remember, this is not,
They're giving
he's
the
not
sign.
requiring conversion to Judaism,
Yeah.
right? He's saying that but it is requiring acceptance of the laws of the Torah as they relate to non-Jews.
And not only that though,
Yeah.
because if you're going to have them as your servants and not have a right to be who they were before, they're honoring out of omission. It's having an increased amount of population who were against you now honoring you.
Right, right. And remember, this ties back to what we were discussing before about, this is in terms of kind of before war is conducted, these are the terms. Before we talked about how war can even come to be initiated in the first place. And what was the key principle that we determined about that? How can war come to be initiated in the first place? It requires the express authorization of God, right? So in other words, God is behind all of this. If God says, yes, go to war with such and such, this is what God envisions. This is what God envisions. The only reason that God would authorize such an action would be to realize this. Okay? I mean, that's the implication of it. For some reason, God, to the extent that God would authorize such a war, it would be because God would want this to happen. Same reason that God wants the destruction of the 7 nations and Amalek. It's about wiping idolatry out of the world. Right? I mean, that's kind of the raison d'etre of the Torah, as it stands. So to the extent that war could ever happen, it would be to envision this. Now notice what the text say. You offer them this, and if they agree, wonderful, no war. If they don't agree, you wage war, and then it says, and then you go on and kill everybody and do all that. Now, that's a pretty bold kind of vision. I mean, the way Maimonides describes it, how is he envisioning the outcome of the war that ultimately does get waged? You win, they lose. I mean, does anything in here say, go out and wage war, and what happens if they overpower you? No. That doesn't even enter into the mix at all. Why?
Well, we can't,
Why?
because God won't allow this.
Exactly, right? So what Maimonides is telling us is that the only kind of war in this context that can happen is war that is specifically desired by God for some divine purpose. And it's a war that will definitely be won because God wants it. Right? The Jewish armies will never lose. That's why they can talk about here kill everybody and take all their money and all that's real nice, but only if you're assured of victory, right? So these texts contemplate war only in the case where victory is assured, and victory is assured because God commands it. And outside of that, you cannot wage war. That's a very narrow definition, or very narrow parameters of the waging of war, according to our halachic sources, right? Aside from all of the stuff that we can say about, wow, it's really violent, and they're kind of envisioning this power, killing, and all these terrible things. What Maimonides is effectively telling us is that this could never happen. It could only happen if, for some reason, unbeknownst to us, God wants it to happen. And if God wants it to happen, we will know. There will be no question about it. Why? Because the Urim and Tumim will tell us. And if we don't have that, none of this matters. It's inoperative. Okay? Sharon.
Okay, so I understand all this, but this has been written after the destruction of the temple.
Right.
So, wait a second. Didn't they have the Urim and Turim?
No.
And they had a bed? They never, they lost
The Urim and Tumim were lost after the destruction of the first temple.
Okay, but the first temple, then they should have used that when the destruction was coming down on them. Something went wrong there. There has one point in time when they lost.
Yeah,
And
that's a
how
good
do you
point.
explain it?
I don't know.
It didn't work.
That's a good point. But you're right, and this is very important that you pointed out that Maimonides is writing all of this in the context of a time and place where none of these institutions exist. By virtue of his writing it, he's telling us something about war, and that is, you could never do this, right? Don't do it. Don't try.
It's over.
Because look at text number 3. Okay? And this is Maimonides from Sefer HaMitzvot. He says, "It is known that war and the conquering of the cities cannot occur except with the king, the council of the great Sanhedrin, and the high priest. Therefore, public acts that relate to the Sanhedrin, prophet and king, or Milchemet Reshut, are not incumbent upon us except when the temple stands." In writing about these things that existed in another time and another construct altogether, Maimonides is telling us something about our own time and our own construct, right? And that is that the standards of war that our tradition requires can never be met in this context. Okay? So to go out and wage war under this pretense is by definition an overstepping of the boundaries, right? An assertion of power by human authorities that don't have the capability or the authority to do it. That's what he's telling us. Okay? We still have to go back to the question of defensive war because it's a little different. Yeah.
Now, isn't he writing during the time of the beginning of the Crusades, the so-called Holy War?
Yeah.
And if
Well,
you
he's writing,
believe
yeah.
that you are having a holy war, you do all these things, and that's what they did. And
That's
it went
maybe
on-
what the
it went on for
Crusaders
200
did.
years or whatever.
Yeah.
And he's writing at that time.
Yeah, right.
So put that, think about that. Who is he writing for? Is he writing to protect the Jewish people because the Crusades are afraid of them fighting back? He's saying, we're not going to fight back. I don't get this.
I don't know.
get this
I don't
holy
think
war
he's going
business.
that so far. Maimonides' project here is to, in the Mishnah Torah, is to identify all of the laws of the Torah, whether they pertain in our time period or not. He just wants to systematize the whole Torah. This stands in contrast with the Shulchan Aruch. If you've heard of the Shulchan Aruch before. The Shulchan Aruch is comes later, several hundred years after Maimonides. It is the halachic code of law par excellence. Everything that, as Judaism develops after the Shulchan Aruch, is based on the Shulchan Aruch. It was written by Rabbi Joseph Caro in the land of Israel in the 16th century. And it forms the basis for how to do things Jewishly in our time. The Shulchan Aruch, his project in the Shulchan Aruch, was different from Maimonides. Caro, in writing the Shulchan Aruch, only wrote about laws which pertain in our time, on the grounds that the stuff that pertains to the Messianic era and everything, that's not, Jews don't need to worry about that now for conducting our daily lives. And significantly, the laws of war are not contained in the Shulchan Aruch, because they are just not applicable, right? And that would go to Marilyn's question that you asked about the modern state of Israel. Well, according to what Maimonides says here, if there's no king, Sanhedrin, and high priest, these categories are inoperative. They cannot be executed. Now, I don't know enough about contemporary halakhic discourse in the state of Israel to speak intelligently about how the categories apply. I do know that there are some rabbinic scholars in Israel who say that what we have in the state of Israel is somewhat of an approximation, at least, of what this was, and therefore these categories may apply in certain respects. And others, I think, would hold that they don't apply at all. The state of Israel this is kind of, from the little I know and what I'm learning, I see that this is an ongoing struggle within the state of Israel and its rabbinic community about trying to figure out how to understand the state of Israel. Is the state of Israel a modern, secular state, like the United States or France or whatever? Should it be categorized that way? Or is it somehow different by virtue of being a sovereign Jewish state in the land of Israel? That's a debate among halakhic authorities. And some do want to say that for purposes of this, but also for other things, that the state of Israel is halakhically different from the United States. And therefore, halakhic categories can apply here differently than they do in America. Others would say that it happens to be a state run by Jews in the Jewish homeland, but it's a secular state. It's not a halakhic state that has these institutions, and therefore it has to be understood functionally the same way that the halakha understands the United States. That's an ongoing debate. Okay? Yeah.
Could it be, some sage once told me, everybody that goes to war says God's on my side.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
Holy water.
Could be that he recognized this back there in 1200 or whatever he did this.
Maybe.
Yeah. They said the same thing then.
Yeah. That's right.
That's right.
Because what he's talking about is, in a sense, holy war. But and he says you can't just claim that God is on your side. You have to know it. I mean, God has to send you an email through the Urim and Tumim, right? Absent that, to the claim that God is on your side is a false claim. And plus, everything that he's requiring here, the kind of the foolproof of that says, well, you got to tell the people they have to become subject to you and give you tribute and accept your laws. And if you don't, you have to go out and kill everyone. And guess what? If God isn't on your side, you're going to lose. They'll destroy you, right? So that will tell you, I guess, if you were right or not. All right, so we have about 20 minutes. I need to elaborate the category of defensive war, because that was Maimonides' third category of Milchemet Mitzvah. And remember, according to Maimonides and the majority view, the Urim and Tumim are not required for Milchemet Mitzvah. That authorization is already given through the Torah. The first two categories, war with the 7 nations and war with Amalek, are inoperative because we can't identify them. But the third category would seem to remain operative. If Israel is attacked, there is a Torah obligation to fight war in defense. Now, Maimonides doesn't give his source for that. He doesn't elaborate it. But it seems to be that others who write about Maimonides comment on him point to this passage from the Talmud as his source. Let's look at it. Text number 2. Rabbi Yehuda said in the name of Rab, if foreigners attack an Israelite city on Shabbat, we may not go out against them with weapons, and we do not profane Shabbat on their account. Regarding what circumstances was this said? When the foreigners come in the interest of money. But if they come in the interest of taking lives, we go out against them with weapons, and we profane Shabbat on their account. And in a case where they attack a border city, even if they do not come in the interest of taking lives, but rather only in the interest of straw or stubble, we still go out against them with weapons and profane Shabbat on their account. Okay, so what do we this text teaches us about the definition of defensive war, the definition of being attacked. Okay, so let's parse it and understand it. What is, according to this passage, what does it mean to be attacked?
Life in danger.
Okay, so well,
Weapons.
it's to have a life in danger, but it's not just that. It's that if foreigners come, they invade, right? They invade with the intention of killing. So that's one thing, right? Okay, an invasion with intent to kill. Okay, and what else?
Taking your land. Well, that's the border, so that would be taking your land.
Yeah, well, okay. Yeah, taking your land. But notice the first statement. If they attack an Israelite city, we don't attack, and this says, when is this said? When they come in the interest of money. So if an army invades, and this is happening on Shabbat, they're asking the question, when does the threshold is across in terms of having to defend on Shabbat? And they say, if an army comes into an Israelite city to steal money, does that count as being attacked, such that it meets the threshold of defense? No. Except for if they attack a border city. Then it's different, right? Okay, so if they attack a border city, even if it's not for the interest of killing, but for something else. So attacking a border city for any purpose, that's an attack too. Okay, so looking at these two categories, how would you define being attacked according to these concepts?
When the wolf is at your gate, when they're right at where you know that there's intent. People
Okay.
are on your border, they're not just going to circle your account. They
Yeah.
want-
Well, it's not just that they're on the board. I mean, I think you're right. The wolf is intending to attack, but it doesn't stop there. Right? That's not enough. Good, because it's not the intent to attack. It's already happened.
Yeah.
The action has been taken. An invasion, right? They either breach you somehow, or they compromise your borders through an action, and that's important. And this becomes very important in halakha in the modern state of Israel. Why? What, Terry?
It happened.
What? Tell when?
Yom Kippur.
Well, okay, in Yom Kippur it happened, they were attacked, but what happens that in Israel history that kind of challenges this definition? Because remember here, it requires action has been taken, that they're attacking you or they breach your borders. The 6-Day War. What happens in the 6-Day War?
Preventative war.
Well, it's not preventative. We have to define that category in a moment. It would be preemptive. Okay.
Sorry.
Yeah, preemptive, because what happens in the 6-Day War?
We attack them.
Yes, Israel is the first one to launch a military attack. But they do it because what? Because the Arab armies line up their planes ready to go. But that would seem not to meet this definition, right? Because this definition says it's only if you are attacked, not if you're about to be attacked. Okay? So that poses a problem, which the halakhic authorities in the state of Israel, I know, did deal with. I haven't read the Shuvot, the responses, so I don't know how they handled it. But to Marilyn's point, I believe they did it on the basis of this and kind of redefining this category. That being attacked is something other than actually having an action launched against you. But the way the sources say it, defensive war, milchemet mitzvah, is war only waged in response to an attack, not preemptive. Preemptive war is a modern category in what is known as just war theory. Anybody ever heard of just war theory? Just war theory is a kind of, it originated in Christian thought and then became secularized. It's a way of thinking about war, determining what kinds of wars, are just wars and what are unjust wars, and kind of it forms the basis for what we know as kind of the Geneva Conventions on what to do in the context of war, what's moral and ethical and what's not within the parameters of war. Just war theory has this notion, this concept of preemptive war. Okay? Preemptive war is what Israel did in the Six-Day War. The wolf is at the gate. And it goes in, just war theorists go into all kinds of great detail about how you know when the threshold has been met of an imminent threat. Preemptive war depends on imminent threat. Okay? Right? And this came up for debate when the United States was talking about war with Iraq, right? How do you know if a threat is imminent or not? That's in just war theory, meeting the threshold. Is it that they're lined up on your border? That's what happened in the Six-Day War. Is it that they're not lined up on your border, but the leaders are talking about we're going to attack you, right? Like Ahmadinejad in Iran says, I'm going to wipe Israel in the face of that. Does that constitute an imminent threat or not? Right? And you have to define imminence, but preemptive war, and we don't have time to go into all of that today, but preemptive war in just war theory is an attack that's launched preemptively in response to an imminent threat. Then, just war theory has another category called preventive war. Okay? Preventive war is different from preemptive war because preventive war is war that is launched to deter some kind of action that is, deter some kind of threat that is not an imminent threat. Okay? So that would be, as in the way that the Reform Responsa Committee addressed the question of the Iraq War, which it did, it wrote a response on it, categorized it, dealt with it as in this category, preventive war. So there's no imminent threat. There was no one was lined up on our borders or such to attack. So it's something else. It's a threat that seems to be a real threat, but it's not imminent. Okay, so that would be preventive war. Now the Jewish sources that we've read do not seem to contemplate this one, except for it did in Milchemet HaReshut. Right? That when the king wants to aggrandize his reputation. That would be kind of preventive. And what was required for that? The Urim and Tumim, because it's Milchemet HaReshut. Without that, this is off the table. Right? Preemptive, responding to an imminent threat. The sources, as we've read them here, also do not seem to know it, because they seem to address only response to a direct attack. Okay? Which would, and that would classify preemptive war as Milchemet HaReshut, which would require the Urim and Tumim, and you can't do it. But then there's debate, because of the Israel experience, as to whether preemptive war should be in the category of Milchemet HaReshut, or Milchemet Mitzvah, or neither. Okay? Some in Israel said, no, it's Milchemet Mitzvah, and that's why we should do it. Others said it's Milchemet HaReshut, and you can't do it. And then others say it's neither category, because those categories don't apply in the modern world. To finish it up with that view, that these categories, neither of them, Milchemet Mitzvah or Milchemet HaReshut, apply in the modern world, because we don't have a state that has a king, Sanhedrin, and priesthood. Let's look at what the halakha says. The last two texts on the blue. There are two in the main, and there may be more, but these are two kind of polar opposite views that we can consider as to how the Jewish tradition would relate to us in modern secular states. The first one is represented here by the Talmud, and is elaborated in a responsum by a major authority from the 18th century called the Khatam Sofer. And the Talmudic principle is, Noachides are not conquerors. Okay, just a very short sentence here. What does that mean? Noachides are not conquerors. Who are Noachides? Noachides is not only people who are obligated to the Noachide law. Noachides are Gentiles. Okay? So if the world is divided into Jews and non-Jews, Jews have certain rules, for war in this case, and Gentiles have other rules. Gentiles, for them, war is governed by the Noachide law. And according to the Talmud, the Noachide law does not permit non-Jews to be conquerors. Okay? That's the way the Jewish law understands it. Now, that doesn't mean the Noachides follow the Jewish law, but that's how our tradition understands it. Noachides are not conquerors. Rashi says, to explain that, no land except Eretz Yisrael is permitted for conquest. And even Israel is permitted to take spoils of war, and there should be only in the context of a war of conquest. So this limits the parameters of war very narrowly. The way Rashi and the Talmud are conceiving of it, that there's only one land in the entire world that is permissible to conquer for anyone. That's the land of Israel, because the Torah says it. Most people are not even permitted to conquer the land of Israel. Only the Jews are permitted to conquer the land of Israel because the Torah says it. Right? Outside of that, conquest is impermissible according to Jewish law. It's a very narrow definition, right? No kind of war except for, what's the implication? The only kind of war that's permissible by anyone outside of the halakhic Jewish state with king, Sanhedrin, and priesthood is only permitted by Jewish law to wage one kind of war, and that's what? The war of defense. Okay? As defined here, in response to an attack. That's permitted by Jewish law for a secular modern state like the United States. Other than that, nothing is permitted. Okay? Now, the opposite, or an opposite view, comes from Rabbi Naftali Tzvi Yehuda Berlin, who's known as the Netziv, a 19th century authority. And he writes in his commentary in Genesis, this is the Noachide laws, Genesis 9:5, states, "Of man too will I require a reckoning for human life, of every man for that of his fellow man." This is the punishment for murder. This is the Noachide prohibition on murder. Okay? And the Netziv says, when is man punished for killing? At a time when it is proper to behave in a brotherly manner. When is this not so? In a time of war and a time of hate. Such is a time to kill, and there is no punishment for this at all, for on such is the world founded. It says in Shavuot 35b, Talmud, A government which kills only 1 out of 6 is not punished. Even the king of Israel is permitted to wage a milchemet hareshut, even though many Israelites will be killed because of this. The Netziv is taking a very different view from Rashi and Talmud, which is to say, what is his view? Tell me. And the question is, war waged by a state which does not have the 3 requisite institutions. Okay, Netziv is saying here that when the world kind of decides it, when things are bad in the world, and when secular states decide to go to war, that's their business. According to the halakha, he's saying the halakha has nothing to say about that. Okay? The Noachides are authorized to wage war. They operate by a different system of law. We don't have anything to say about it. It's their business, and our laws don't pertain to them. Okay? So that would be opposite from the Talmudic position, because whereas the Talmudic position, followed by Rashi and then Khatam Sofer, say that our law does say about secular modern states, and it says that no war is permissible unless it's in response to a direct attack. The Netziv says, no, actually, modern secular states operate by a whole different set of rules. The halakha has nothing to say about it, and they do what they do. And the halakha says, okay, your business, right? And we could use either of those paradigms, which are rooted in the Jewish teachings on war, to evaluate the way our country behaves. It says war is broadly permissible, or war is not permissible at all. What we can't do is take milchemet mitzvah and milchemet hareshut and subject the United States government to it, because it doesn't make sense. It doesn't apply to them, right? Beyond that, I believe we need to use the teachings of just war theory, because just war theory is a way of thinking about war that pertains to secular states. Okay? But our tradition gives us different paradigms for thinking about it within that context. And we might say that, as a Jew, in the modern world, I believe that my tradition teaches that unless war is authorized by God, and we know that can't happen, we're waged. Human beings we don't have this kind of knowledge to carry out war. We're not qualified to do it. And it's an arrogation of power to ourselves to carry out war. And so I'm going to say that unless the United States is attacked directly, I don't support war. Or we could say what the Netziv says, and says, I know what my tradition teaches me about war, and that in an ideal world, and God willing, someday there will be the Messianic age, and the Jewish people will carry out its government in accordance with the halakha and the vision of God. But until then, we live in a broken world, and politics function on a different level, and states do what they do, and I have to kind of evaluate that as someone coming from the secular standpoint, because Judaism doesn't have anything to say about it. Okay? So these are just kind of we're out of time. But these are some, I don't know, hopefully you got some stuff to take with you about it, about our philosophies on war and government. Okay, thank you all for coming here.